Danny boy, what's up, man?
Dude, it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm so grateful and honored to be a guest on this show since I respect both of you guys so much.
Dude, it's been a long time coming. I remember when we first met, it was in CJ Finley's house, and there was that little like magnetic, little like electric connection where we sat on the couch for like an hour, and everyone else was kind of just like doing their own thing. And you and I were just talking podcasting. I immediately leave and text Brett. I'm like, Brett, you got to meet this guy. He's one of us.
You said there's something different about him.
Yeah.
And now here we are. And there's a lot of really interesting similarities between the three of us too. It's like 3 episodes a week. We're both in it. We love finding new guests, building out this podcasting, which is, notoriously slow and monotonous. It takes a while to monetize, but there's that concept of obsession that I think the three of us really share. And it's cool to just see the way that we've all become friends in a very short period of time. But when you have that same DNA, it's like these things just naturally happen.
Yeah, there are people in the world who do a thing that you do, but they're not actually doing it to the level that they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who actually are doing it to the level that you respect and admire. And it's like, I just gravitate naturally to those people.
Yes.
It's like if I say I'm going to meditate an hour a day and someone else says they're going to meditate for an hour a day, I have such deep respect for them in that realm because I'm like, this is one of me. And so I try to push the extremes of what I'm capable of. And podcasting is one of the ways I do that. And when I see that in both of you guys, I'm like, oh, like this is different. And this is two people that I respect and admire so much. So,
Well, it's very cool for both of us just to be on your show and be on the other side of the microphone. I mean, number one, it's just cool to get interviewed by someone, but someone like you, who's such a close friend, we've listened to so many episodes of your podcast to actually get to feel what other people are getting to experience and your questions and your passion. And you brought out new insights and new thoughts that neither Harry and I had ever connected before.
Right.
Like, remember your story when you were talking about quitting your job with no plan B. You hadn't really publicly talked about that before, but that's what he brought out of you.
I hadn't talked about it. I remember leaving, we were talking, and it's just cool watching somebody else who's doing the same craft that you're doing and being like, the way Danny asks questions, it's not necessarily what he's saying, but the emphasis that he's putting on words, like just different ways of asking it to make the guest feel more comfortable opening up, or like just leading the guest to kind of where you want them to go. Is like, you see the art in action, and it's super impressive.
I appreciate that tremendously. And you said, you wrote on a note last night, do everything with love.
Yes.
Right. And that's what I'm really trying to do when I'm podcasting. I'm trying to give the other person or people who are my guests, I'm trying to give them love. And I know that anything that I say or do in the conversation will be okay because my intent is love. And so when you're coming at it from that perspective, you're at peace with anything that happens. You're not thinking about, oh, if I say this instead of this, it's like, it's all just flowing through you because it's coming with love.
And that was something. So in preparation for this podcast, I went back and listened to episode 1, and your good buddy, Tej.
Yes. Tej Dosa.
So one of the things he said about you was that you do everything with intent. And when he initially said that, he was talking about your drop shipping course that you created. And I think it's so interesting watching someone fall into what they're supposed to be doing, but then looking back at what they were doing before and seeing that their heart was clearly in the right place with what they were creating, but they were just creating the wrong thing or doing something that maybe wasn't fully lighting you on fire. So I know we wanted to just dive into kind of how you got started, like what were those first days of the podcast? You've told it a million times, but I think just diving into what things were like back, June 2018.
So June 2018 was when I started drop shipping, and June 2020 was when the ideas for the podcast started to come about.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, do I read the email or do I not read the email?
Read the email.
Okay. So the email that we're referring to it came up on your podcast with Andy Frisella. Is that your second most viewed podcast?
Yeah, on YouTube.
It's got like 25,000 views on YouTube.
Yes.
And it was like a monumental podcast. We feel like that's kind of like your magnum opus for a number of reasons. Like Andy Frisella, he's had a massive impact on you. He's had a huge impact on us. You've done 75 Hard. I've done 75 Hard. You will do 75 Hard eventually, I'm sure.
I feel like I've done it like...
You have, in your own way. But he's had a tremendous impact on so many people. He's built, an incredible business at First Form. And to see the poise that you had and the quality of the interview, and him literally tell you afterwards that it was the best interview that he's ever done, that was so cool for us to see. And just the poise that you had was incredible. But the whole purpose of me prefacing it with this is you read an email that you wrote in the middle of working with Tej on September 9th, 2019. And the reason why this email is so impactful is it's almost intimidating to see you now, where it's like, Danny Miranda, 350 podcast episodes, you're getting the biggest guests, 3 episodes a week. But to understand where you were a few years ago, I think it will actually give a lot of people hope. And it shows the incredible growth that you've had over the last 4 years. So I'm just going to read that really quick.
This is good stuff.
This is really good.
Thank you for the intro.
From the heart.
That. Yeah.
Well, it's important context and it's true. All right. So September 9th, 2019. Hey, Tej, the purpose of clicks and copy is to turn you into a killer, and you've provided everything necessary to do so. I regularly find myself going through the trainings more than once, so thank you for making the program so damn valuable. But I just can't seem to apply them. I'm a bitch. Wanted to talk to someone who wasn't a friend and parent about what's been going on. As you know, San Diego is fucking dope, but I'm in a big time rut. I really should be more motivated than ever. I'm in a sick location. I have some stuff, but not everything I want. But the truth is, I have no idea why I just don't feel like doing anything except going to the gym. When I go to work for Blue Ocean, I just have no desire to. I wonder if this is just who I am because I have the same mindset in college. When I go to think about an agency, I think I have no experience, so how can I be good? When I go to think about building a product business, I tell myself I'm not good enough. It's so weird, man. I know I should be grateful for the job, for the life I'm currently living, and in many respects, I am. I just don't care to do the work anymore. I say I want to. I say I'll snap out of it eventually, but insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I apologize for writing this email. I feel like a bitch. I debated hitting send multiple times. I'm sorry, man.
What comes to mind when you hear that?
Dude, I just closed my eyes when you were reading that because I just wanted to put myself back at the San Diego library that I was in at the time and really just think about where I was and what I was doing at that time. It's a remarkable thing to realize that you can change. And I think a lot of people understand that. They might have seen that in other people or have done it themselves and actually made a change that's monumental in their life. But then to actually hear those words back and to internalize where I am with myself at this point in my life, right? Like people might look at the external, the episodes, the how I show up in the world, but it's like the internal, the voice with me in my own head. How is that? And to me, that is transformed. And so it just makes me think so much more is possible. And it makes me constantly raise the bar on myself because I'm like, oh, wow, if I am at this point in my life and I've done that over the last 1,300, 1,400 days, what are the next 1,300 or 1,400 days going to look like when this is my starting point? So yeah, I tweeted right before this podcast, like, continue hammering, one foot in front of the other. Because like, that is where my mind is.
Yes.
Like, that's what got me to this point. And so if you realize and break down the steps that I've actually done to get to this point, it's like, all right, one of them is 75 hard. Another is meditating. And that I would not be who I am without sitting with myself for hundreds of hours. And so if that sounds intimidating to you, it's like, start with 20 minutes, 20 minutes in the morning. First thing you wake up, listen to your own voice. Like you don't know what you actually like or enjoy. The reason why I got into those businesses, drop shipping and starting agencies I didn't know my own voice. I'd spent 24 years of my life looking at what other people thought that I should do. I'd hop on Twitter and someone would be like, all right, the best business to start is a drop shipping business. All right, the best business to start is an agency. It's like, dude, what do you value? What do you care about? What are you good at? And so when I started listening to myself, I first thought I was going to be a personal trainer, but then it was like, it slowly morphed into creating the podcast a year later. So
were you meditating when you wrote that email? Like, was that some self-reflection that you were doing that bred that email?
That was the first day that I started meditating.
Wow.
Or like I started meditating within that week.
That's crazy.
So like, that's a real set point of what I was like before meditation.
were there any other things that you were doing at the time? I've heard you talk about journaling, and both of us are just massive fans of both of those mediums, just for exactly the point that you're saying. Learn how to listen to that internal voice, or at least understand what that voice is trying to tell you.
Yeah. I mean, for me, meditation is the biggest piece. Another is writing. Another is podcasting, right? Because when you're podcasting, you're forced to ask the question that you're actually interested in. You can't, I mean, some people podcast for other people about other topics, but personally, it's just always been an internal game for me. And so because of that, I can then ask the questions that are on my mind. But for other people, it's like, you have to find a way to go inward. If you don't find a way to go inward, society will tell you, do this, do that. And you will be done with it at 30 years, 40 years, being like, I've done everything for other people.
Yeah.
So
I would have to imagine that email in some ways must have been cathartic to you. And the reason why I say that is it was really interesting reading that email, because I feel like you basically summed up the exact emotions that I felt multiple times in my life. I know you've experienced that too, but as men, it's very difficult to be vulnerable. It's one thing to think those things, or maybe even tell a friend, but it's another thing to actually put those words on paper and then press the send button. But I would imagine in some ways that's maybe like step one of like, all right, I'm going to admit this to someone else. Now I can kind of like pick up the pieces and figure out what the next step forward is. And it sounds like that was meditation, 75 Hard, and that kind of led to you starting the show in 2020. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like when you're admitting your truth to someone else, you're then taking accountability for it in that moment. And so once you start taking accountability, then you can actually take the steps to make a new reality occur.
Totally.
Was there a reason why Tej was on the other side of that email?
Yeah, because I had watched and looked at his tweets for a year straight prior to sending that email. I had enrolled in his program and was like, oh, this dude is different. He is acting with love. He is acting with kindness. He is just a good human being. I could tell from the way he was showing up in the world. And so because of that, I was like, I trust him. And we had some calls before as well. So there was a lot of trust there.
What was his response back to you from that email that you had sent him?
Dude, it was 10,000 words of like, this is what I did when I was in a similar situation. This is how I would think about this. These are actionable things you can do. And so his response was just, he like purposely thought on it for a few days. And because of that, it was incredibly impactful. Just the amount of care that he brought into it.
I'm interested in pressing into this relationship in particular because he was your first podcast episode, but then he also interviewed you. So he clearly has played a huge role in just getting you going on the path that you were supposed to be on. So at what point was it like during 75 Hard, or was it just through conversations with him that you were like finally figuring out that you were on the right path? Because I think that's a tough distinction too. You can start making all these changes and you're still like maybe feeling like you're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's tough to really see that clarity. Like, okay, I know I'm doing the right thing right now.
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't until I started the podcast that I felt like I was doing the right thing. And that was a year later. And so I had played around with being a personal trainer and thought that was going to be the path. And I had a bunch of synchronicities that happened at that time where I was like, wow, this is happening and this is happening. And so for me, it was the real point of being like, wow, I'm doing what I'm put on this earth to do, was when I started the podcast. Even though I wasn't good at it, even though I was enjoying it. And I knew that the other person was also enjoying it. And I knew that, oh, wow, like this isn't what it's going to be, but this is really good. And this feels really good. And I could do this forever. And so that was the moment when I felt like this is the right thing. And it took a year, right? It took a year of working on myself to get to that point. It's not like, for me, it wasn't some overnight thing of like finding what I was supposed to do as soon as I sent the email. That was like the first step. And then the work happened of 75 Hard meditation. And then a year later, it's like almost exactly, right? The podcast starts September 23rd, 2020. That email sent September 9th, 2019. It's like pretty close.
Yeah. So when you're starting the show, are you the type of person that's thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to do 3 episodes a week. I'm going to do it over Zoom. I'm going to do it in person. I'm going to focus on creators? Or is it more so like, I just need a creative medium and I feel really good about this, and I'm just going to start putting episodes out and just let it evolve naturally?
Yeah. So for me, I was like, I'm going to do 1 a week and I'm going to do 100 and see if this works. At the time I was writing a lot And I had put up a bunch of blogs on my website because James Clear had done that. We talked about that on our episode. And it was crazy because I started recording so many episodes that I was like, oh, I have 20 in the backlog and I haven't even published one. My release date that I told people is September 23rd and it's August 29th and I've already recorded 10 episodes. So like I gotta put out more than one a week. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I started putting out 3 a week because I was like, I just enjoy this so much and I don't want someone to wait 20 weeks who've recorded 20. The conversation won't be relevant anymore. So
it's kind of funny because ours was like
very similar.
Ours was so similar where we recorded the first one, the Riverside didn't work, so we had to re-record. And then I think we released like 4 or 5 episodes in the first month. And then the second month was where we went kind of bonkers. We did like 35 episodes in a month. And we were just like, I guess we're podcasters now. We're going to like lean into this. But it's funny how that initial experience, like you do need to give yourself the freedom to just feel it out, but you also need to commit at some point. And it's cool that you did 20 and then you're like, I just need to get this thing going. Was there a point where you felt like you were like comfortable calling yourself a podcaster?
I've never really had a lot of imposter syndrome in my life with anything. And maybe this stems from being 15 years old and going to the Knicks media day and interviewing NBA players when I'm 15 years old and everyone else is, 30, 40, 50. And so I never had imposter syndrome about being a podcaster. I'm just like fulfilling my life's mission is how I think about it. And so if you want to call me a podcaster, great. If you want to call me an interviewer, also great. If you want to call me just an explorer of human beings and their souls, that's great too.
Yeah.
What's also fascinating is that, so it sounds like you got the first 20 in the backlog really quick and you had Gary Vee on episode 39. So you had him on very early in your journey. And from what I understand, that was the first that was the first podcast you did video. Up to that point, it was audio only. Can you tell us that story about like how you got him on, what that was like for you, that entire experience? Because that's a huge hit to get really early on in your podcasting journey. And I would be shitting a brick if that was episode 39, but you seem like you're very poised. So I could see you not shitting a brick at the same time, but yeah.
Dude, it was the biggest hit of a drug that I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
Like it was insane. And particularly because of the way in which it happened was so crazy. It was like, I believe December 4th, 2020, I put out a list of my dream guests. And I believe one of them was Andy Frisella. It was Jocko, Mike Posner, people who are still dream guests of mine to this day. And one of them was Gary Vee. And what happened was because I had spent so much time and energy building this podcast and tweeting about it so much that people were like, yo, like Gary Vee, you should come on this podcast. But there was also a couple of interesting things that I did. One was I went back and I looked at a blog that I wrote in 2009 about Gary Vee. And I tweeted, hey, Gary Vee, like I've been a fan since I was 13 years old. Like I could spot talent since I was a young kid. And I tweeted that blog post that I wrote in 2009. When I tweeted that blog post, he then followed me. When he followed me, then I tweeted that he followed me. And then people went crazy because I was like, this is a huge day for me. And so it was that sequence of events that made that happen. It wasn't that I just tweeted the dream guest list, which I've said in other podcasts and I've said to people before because that makes more sense and can help. But the nuance of those story is like, I did specific things to make that happen. And I think that it's like and there's an important lesson there to be learned is like the speed of implementation. So 9 a.m., I make that tweet about dream guests. By 10 a.m., I'm putting out and bring that blog post to the forefront. By 12 and by noon, I'm then tweeting that he followed me. So it's like that whole thing happened very quickly. And then that chain of events led to him at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. agreeing to come on.
Wow.
And so imagine like, I don't know, you have like 5,000 or 6,000 followers on Twitter and this is all going on. I lost my mind. Like I couldn't sleep that night. Like I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, I just did this shit again. Like by again, I mean, I was 15 years old interviewing NBA players. I just did this with one of the biggest business icons in the world. And I just used the power of the internet. What the hell is going on? Like there's something different here. There's something different happening. Like this is God's plan. Like I was like at a loss for words.
I think the power of the internet is something I did not understand at all until we started doing this. The ability to connect with people through Twitter is so powerful, and it can come at kind of these random moments when you don't expect anything to happen. The amount of guests that we've pulled from Twitter, I think from an outsider looking in, if you're interested in starting a podcast, being able to leverage a medium like Twitter or a blog to get the attention of people who you might want to have on a podcast is massive. And you've done that time and time again. We've done it. And then to kind of build on that, you had Gary on the show, but now you're heading to his conference. So you've clearly kept his attention further than just, come on my podcast and we'll record an episode and then see you later.
Well, that's an important piece too, is that for some people and for a previous version of myself, that was the Super Bowl, and that would have meant it's over after this.
Right.
For me, at this point in my life, because I'd built the habits of doing 75 hard, because I'd been meditating, I was like, all right, job's not finished. This is step one. And this is when the work begins. Gary talks all the time about how when you actually achieve the thing, it's like, that's when the real work begins.
Totally.
It's like Andy comes on the podcast, Andy Frisella. It's like, all right, now there's a network of people who are now open to me that previously never were. Now the work begins again. So that's why I think it's so important to be playing a game that you want to actually win and that you want to actually stay in, because you're going to win and you're going to be required to do more work. So it's like, play a game that you actually enjoy playing, because if you don't, when you achieve the thing, you're going to be sitting there being like, oh, damn, I got to do more now. But I'm excited to do more because I love podcasting. I love learning about people's stories. So it's like, find that game that is exciting to you and that you want to keep playing even after you hit what you think right now is the pinnacle.
You kind of perfectly led into my next question, because one of the things I was going to say to you is you are one of, if not the most well-networked connectors that I personally know. And I thought that it would be really cool for the audience just to learn a little bit of insight into your mind about how you think about punching above your weight, getting amazing guests, or just like connecting with really interesting people. It sounds like Twitter has been a large part of your strategy. It's like if LinkedIn could actually tap into what Twitter is, it would be fucking bananas. No one knows this. But yeah, it would be an amazing, but I would love to just like kind of unpack that, because I'm sure you've thought about that multiple times, because you're continually going to the well and now getting 3 stellar guests every single week.
Yeah, man. I think what's crazy is that great people know great people, and everyone wants to refer and help you out if they know that you're willing to invest in yourself, right? Like, and I just continue to show up for myself time and time again, meaning like I'm putting out 3 episodes a week, and then someone refers me to Andy Frisella because they're like, oh, I actually really like this guy, and I see how much work he's putting in for himself. So that's a key piece of it. Like, are you doing the work to be the person that gets the referral? But another piece of it is like, when I realized that my actual advantage was the people that I knew and my connections, I started taking that a lot more seriously than I ever had before. And that means like remembering someone's birthday if you can, like sending them a gift, bringing them, trying to do nice things for people with no expectation. It's like all these little things that I'd previously never thought about or considered until I realized that my unique advantage was just the people that I knew. And so if that is actually the case, then you nurture that, then you care about people at another level. And I always care about people. Like, I cared about people since I started doing phone calls with them. But then you're like, that's what I'm offering the world. Like, another example of this is I started realizing that I'm offering the world my questions. Like, that's one of the skills that people are coming to me for. So because of that, I then create a list in my phone of great questions to ask, which I'll share with you guys if you're curious, and I tweet about sometimes. But it's just like when you realize your unique advantage, double down on that, triple down on that. There are things that you're good at right now, someone listening, that you should be thinking about and being like, how do I get even better at this thing that I'm naturally inclined to do?
One of the things you mentioned was the phone calls. I'm curious about this because to most people, it probably seems like a very zero ROI type of thing. You know, if that's the way your brain works, you're thinking, it's kind of a waste of time. But I imagine you learned a lot about yourself during that period and shifted through some of the nonsense of like, oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. And like the clutter in your brain, and those phone calls maybe gave you a little bit of that clarity. So I'd be interested just to talk about the concept of doing things that don't necessarily have a return, but they put you on the path to figure out what you need to be doing.
Yeah. So when I was 15 years old, I wanted to go to a book signing with Gary Vee, but it was a school night and I couldn't go because it was a school. Like my mom was like, what the hell is wrong with you? You're going to go to this book signing for this guy that I've never met and so I tweet at him when I'm 15 and be like, at Gary Vee, would love to go to your book signing, but I can't. It's a school night. And he's like, oh, no problem. What's your mom's number? Calls her up on the spot and is like, hey, Miss Miranda, I think your son will get more value out of this book signing than he would doing homework. And I was like, oh my God, the amount of people that I've told that story to is insane. And what did that take for him? 20 seconds of his time. It was probably the last thing that he was thinking or wanting to do. But now that story has played ripples, not only in my heart that I have an affinity towards him forever, but also that I have told and retold and retold and I've probably told tens of thousands of people that story through the podcast and in person.
That's the craziest butterfly effect thing of all.
So when you think about that, the power of a phone call that he did 12 years ago is still paying dividends for him. I very much expect the 30 people that I was doing phone calls with back then to be like, oh, I remember during COVID when this guy, I rang him up and we had a great conversation. I very much expect that I'm going to be hearing this story from somebody on the podcast unexpectedly being like, oh yeah, I was one of the people you did a phone call with. And so I think we just have a very little understanding for how much our actions can ripple, the bigger we make our impact and the more work you're willing to do. For example, the phone call doesn't mean anything from Gary Vee if he stops working and in 2010, right? We're just like, yeah, this random author gave me a phone call. Who cares? But because he's built his network and his star, that phone call now has more and more meaning. And so I also am aware of this, of like episode 1 means more today than it did when episode 1 actually was recorded. The bigger and bigger this show gets, the more and more these little moments actually mean. So yeah, I think that's important for people to keep in mind, especially if they have a big vision.
And now you're creating your own ripple effects. I saw on Twitter yesterday, one of your fans of the show tweeted out that I think he maybe cold DM'd you looking for podcasting advice, expecting you would maybe just DM him like a couple tips. He says that you called him out of the blue, spent 30 minutes on the phone with him, gave him a ton of free alpha, and then you guys had a fantastic conversation. And it's like, he will never forget that. And now as you grow, it'll create a ripple effect for him. And that story will then become legendary in its own right too. But there's no reason why you need to do that. You just seem like you're someone that gets energy talking to other people and really just adding value however you can. And clearly that was something that was Gary Vee had that impact on you, doing that to your mom when you were 15 years old.
Before we get into the episode, let's talk about Fawn Bone Broth's carnivore blend.
100%. Yeah. We've been huge fans of bone broth the last few months. It's really fueled our carnivore journey. Bone broth is incredibly nourishing, especially on a carnivore, animal-based, or just any type of diet, to be honest with you. And what's great about Fawn is that they're a very simple, pure product. So their product is just boiled bones, water, salt, and most of their products have spices like turmeric, cayenne, cracked pepper, but they actually just came out with their carnivore broth, which is very simple, chicken bone broth, water, and salt too. So they're eliminating all their spices and just giving you something very pure that won't disrupt the gut.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about with the elimination diet is the fact that there's so many things that do actually affect how your body reacts to the food you put in your body. And the fact that they're just doing a pure bone broth with bones and just the minimal ingredients, I think is huge. And the carnivore audience will love this one. Fawn does regenerative bone, so it's really high quality stuff. Go check it out. Use our promo code in the link below.
Yep, code MAFIA will get you 15% off your first order.
My cup is filled. I fully love myself and fully am so grateful for where I am in this moment. So why wouldn't I want other people to also experience that? And so this is the thing. And this is one thing that I would look at Gary Vee when I was 15, 17, 19, 22 and be like, why does this guy have so much love? Why is he acting like this? I've never once felt like I want other people to win. And then I started meditating and I was like, oh, I have self-awareness. I see the ways in which I've miscommunicated or done wrong to other people. And so maybe Gary Vee has it naturally, but what I got through meditation was the ability to love myself and to look at myself with compassion and kindness, which then made me want to give that to other people. So the reason why I talk about meditation the way I do is because I understand how I was before. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing that, it changed how I view life. And I was like, oh, this is what Gary Vee is looking at in life. He's looking at life through a lens of self-awareness and love. And now I'm doing that too. And so therefore I just want to give to people.
Can we press in on the meditation piece? Because it's something I think all three of us have experimented with. You are doing it all the time. Like, it's something I want to get back to. But for someone, I remember having a phone call with a friend and I was telling him, yo, I'm meditating and it's literally changing my life right now. And he was like, dude, I've tried it before and I can't tap into it. So I would just be curious to understand your progression through it, because there is that initial point where you're sitting there breathing through your nose, just like, what am I doing? And then you hit a point where you start getting deeper into your thoughts, paying attention to what's happening. So just would love to dive deeper into that and just give some helpful advice to people who are just getting started with it.
Yeah. So for me, it started with 20 minutes in the morning of setting a timer on an external device. So I would like buy a kitchen timer and set it for 20 minutes. And I would sit there on the ground on the floor with my back straight. And for 89 days straight, I shit you not, I thought this was doing nothing. And I was like, Tej does this and it works for him. Like, this is not for me. On the 90th day, I go home and I'm sitting in a red light and I'm driving the car for the first time because I didn't have a car in San Diego. And I stop at the red light and I notice my body get agitated. I notice, why is this light red? This light should be green. Go, 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 go. And then I was like, whoa, why did I think that? And then I was like, oh my God, every time that I'd been at a red light before, that was my first reaction of like, go, 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 go. So it's like, whoa, now I could change it because I recognized it. And I was like, oh, wow. So all of the work that I had been doing, the quote unquote meditation, that's what gave me in that moment was the ability to change my own mental state faster. Mm-hmm. And life, as I talked about with Andy Frisella, is about changing your mental state faster. And so the reason why I meditate is because it gives me a greater understanding of my own thoughts so that I can change them and don't fall into the loops of what life gives me. Because inevitably something wrong will happen in life and you can either dwell on that for months, for years, some people do, and I'm sure I have in the past as well, or you can just change it. And so meditation gave me the ability to change my thoughts and still does to this day. And yeah, I would recommend people to start with 20 minutes in the morning and to not judge the results for 90 days. You can't do this practice and think that on day 30, it's going to be better and your life is going to be better. It's like, try doing push-ups for 30 days and like your life better. Like you can just, is everything good? Like, no, it's a practice and it takes months to get to where you want to be. And that's okay. Like it's very much a skill, and to give yourself grace for it, like you talked about in the first 90 days of doing it, because you're probably not going to be great at it. But if you just sit there and watch the thoughts go by, you will be a lot better than you would be if you're, and it also won't save your life. Like it won't change everything and make your life amazing. Like it's not the magic bullet. You will still make mistakes, but it will help you recognize those mistakes a little bit faster and better.
It's something as small as managing your reaction to a red light, which you think is very small. But then when you look at the course of your day over 24 hours, an entire week, how many red light type moments pop up that you're wasting energy on because you don't have the mental skill set or the mental model, whatever you want to call it, to be able to deal with that stuff adequately. I think about that with myself all the time. Oh, I fucked this question up on the podcast. Oh, the sales call didn't go well. Like, dude, the meditation, the things you learn from that process, if you can learn that correct skill set to be able to change course, it's huge, dude.
And another thing is that I had Joe Hudson on episode 348, and he was also, I think, the mental coach for Sam Altman. So really? Just like an absolute legend. And I was like, oh my God, this is insane. But he was saying how, think about where that is showing up in other places in your life, where you're trying to rush things, because a lot of times we'll have these reactions, but it's actually indicative of a much bigger pie. So for somebody who like overeats, for example, it might be that they're overeating in another aspect of their life, but it just might be looked at differently. So like for me, the big takeaway was like, oh, where else am I rushing? And I just had to think about that. And it was helpful because I never considered that before.
I wonder, I think a lot of people who get into meditation don't know what to expect when it comes to the changes that they can experience in their life through meditation. Like when you work out, the goal is to get stronger. Like when you run, it's like get faster, get better cardio. But what can people expect from meditating? Like, what are some of the things that you could dilute it down to that are, you mentioned the red light story, but anything else?
Yeah. So for me, it's a greater sense of peace, calmness, presence, understanding that each moment is perfect just the way it unfolds, and the ability to understand that the things that I'm doing are internally motivated instead of externally motivated. This is not the script that society is telling me to run. The script that society is telling me to run is be a lawyer, be a doctor, or, go to grad school or get this job. But like, that's not the script that I wanted to run. And so I got to choose my scripts better. And you get better at choosing your own scripts and being slightly different than what other people would suggest. And another thing is like there used to be a feeling that I would have sometimes of like, I want to appease the other person. I want to make the other person feel comfortable. And so because of that, I'll be less myself. And so that feeling just goes down and down and down and down until it's not even there. That's been my experience of like, I'm so much more comfortable owning my own desires, even if it's at the detriment of someone else, because I'm more comfortable in my own skin.
Mm.
Have you personally seen or felt the ripple effects of meditating in podcasting, which is, it's a war of attrition. It's slow to monetize. It's slow to grow your audience. 90% of podcasts quit after episode number 3. What is that like, the convergence of meditation and then trying to be aggressively patient growing a podcast?
Dude, it's so applicable, not just in the macro, but in the micro of the conversation as well. When you're sitting with somebody, let's say that you get bored or your mind goes into a different place, you can then go back to, oh, wow, I got bored in that moment. All right, we're back. And so there's also the piece of like, you gain greater awareness in general when you meditate. So then it's like, oh, you have greater awareness for how this thing that someone said also connects to something else. And so the micro is really important. And then you think about the macro of like, all right, patient, you got to sit there for an hour with your thoughts, just let it go. You're like, wow, okay, I can do that. I'm more comfortable with that than most other people would be because I do this on a day-to-day basis and I'm not expecting a result from doing the thing. And so that's a common theme in all of the things we do. It's like, you don't get rewards right away. And that's actually the good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually the differentiator. And if you do that for weeks, months, years, decades, that's really when you'll see the results.
What sort of skills do you think make a good podcaster?
The ability to be comfortable with the moment, the ability to let it unfold. So 20 minutes into talking to Shopify co-founder, Harley Finkelstein, he tells me his grandma.
Great name, by the way.
Harley Finkelstein. What a legend.
That was such a good episode, by the way.
Thank you. But 20 minutes in, he tells me my grandmother passed away this morning. And it's like, well, now you have to deal with new information in that moment that you previously never considered and wouldn't even know how to deal with it. And so that's what meditation helps you with. What are you feeling in that moment? How are you tapping into that? How are you able to be comfortable feeling your body or feeling what comes up in your mind and saying it with love and compassion? It's like being a good podcaster is being comfortable with the present moment and whatever the present moment unfolds to be, and then allowing your feelings. What are you feeling in this moment? Like actually tap into that. What are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? And then actually being able to say that. To me, that's what makes for a good podcaster.
You had mentioned that I think on your phone, you keep a list of great questions. Could we maybe dive into that a little bit? And I'm curious, like, do those great questions expand even beyond podcasting? Or are those questions that anyone can be utilizing to, network better, connect better with people?
Absolutely. And this great questions list is like, I probably add something new to it, maybe once a week, twice a week, something like that. So at the top, it's from Patrick O'Shaughnessy, is a tweet that says, most great questions fall into one of two buckets. One, what are the most interesting / notable things about your past and your life story? And two, what are the most interesting and unique beliefs / views that you have about the world and how things work? And so if you understand that the questions fall into one of those two buckets, what's your life experience and what are the interesting things that have happened? Right? Like you guys got that out of me where I'm talking about Gary Vee and how he's impacted me at a young age. And these are the specific stories of how that's happened. That's very impactful to people. And the other is like, what are the most interesting and unique beliefs you hold? It's like, well, I'm talking about meditation, how that's impacting my life, and these are the specific ways it's helped. So if you really think about a good podcast, you connect with somebody in some story, and the way you connect is by an interesting story, a life story, interesting moments, and also interesting or unique viewpoints. And so that's how I think about interesting questions. And if you like, there's an actual list of probably 100 that I have, and most of them fall into those two buckets.
Who are your inspirations when it comes to creating that list? Because I'm sure some of those come maybe when you're meditating or on a run or whatever, but I'm sure some also come from when you're listening to a podcast too.
Yeah, a lot of the questions do not come from me, and but I think that's what you do when you have a podcast.
Yeah.
You are a curator of all the people that you've had on, and so because you're that curator, you're able to pull. Oh, I really liked how this person said this or that person. For me, it was like Tim Ferriss has played a big role. Patrick O'Shaughnessy himself is like an incredible question asker. There's questions in there from Rogan. There's questions in there from Chris Williamson. It's like, there's so many different people. And there's also just like random tweets that I find. So yeah, I'll post those or give you a link to them so you could put them in the show notes if you like.
That would be incredible. Because it's the art of asking great questions. It's like, that's one of the most priceless skill sets that you can actually have.
And the reason for that is because what can you give somebody who has all the money in the world? You can give them a new perspective. Everybody always is looking for a new perspective, and new perspectives are really more valuable than money. And so that's why I feel comfortable sitting across the room from Elon Musk if I were given that opportunity. That's why I felt comfortable talking to Andy Frisella, because I knew I was capable of giving him a new perspective. And you even heard it, like go to minute 15 of that episode where he's like, I've never considered that. When I asked him about why he's so comfortable sharing his flaws, never considered that. And so he's running a $500 billion company, and he's sitting there being like, I never considered that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's a pretty valuable thing to have in your arsenal and gives you a lot of confidence when you're going about your day-to-day life. You're giving somebody who's worth $1 billion a new perspective.
Yeah.
So it's like, we can all cultivate that for ourselves. Go listen to episode 1 of the podcast, right? It sounds a lot different than how it sounds today.
Yeah.
So
when you're now at the level of podcasting where it's like you're getting on super A-list guests continuously, which we've mentioned a few times, is your goal now to give these guests and listeners an experience or an interview that they've never listened before? Like, what do you think about in terms of the end goal with a super A-list guest like a Frisella or a Musk when you get him on?
My goal is always the same. How can I help the guests learn something about themselves? When you guys came out of the interview and you're like, wow, I've never said this perspective in this way or connected, that's a win for me.
Yes.
Because I'm giving you a new perspective. I'm helping you learn something about yourselves. And that's what I view a win as. If I do that, then you have a good experience. And if you have a good experience, you want to tell your friend about that good experience you had. Hey, you got to go. People don't even know why they're referring me to their friends and telling me that they're having a good experience, but that's because they haven't podcasted and they don't know what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give them a new experience. And when I do that, then I'm happy, and then they're happy, and then they tell their friends, and then the podcast grows.
It seems like you take pride in giving the guests somewhat of like oh wow, I hadn't thought of that moment. Where does that come from?
It just is a high. Like I don't know. It's so internal that it's hard. It's like the way I've compared it to people is like a comedian telling a joke and they hear that laugh from the audience. For me, the equivalent of that is a guest saying, huh, or I've never heard that before. I've never considered that, or wow, I did do that. And I didn't realize. So like, I don't know where it comes from exactly. I just know that it feels so good. And it's like, why I can see myself doing this forever, because that feeling doesn't go away.
And also you're interviewing people who are so accomplished, and having them evaluate their own life maybe in a different way that they hadn't seen before is crazy. Like they're just living their life, building their business, like Andy Frisella, for instance, and you throw a little curveball into the conversation, and now he's thinking about, oh wow, I had never thought about like 75 hard and how it actually makes you like commit and do what you say you're going to do. Like that whole conversation around like you committing to 75 hard, changing your life. Like he had never experienced that before. And it was just cool to listen to. And like, that was just like a gem of a experience being able to even listen to it.
Yeah. It's a remarkable thing. And I feel so blessed that I am just in this mind and body to experience this, because I don't feel like I'm doing anything. That's the weird part about it. I don't feel like it doesn't feel difficult for me to do. I know I have an interview with Zach Hanavar tomorrow night. There's nothing in me that's like, oh shit, I gotta listen to all these episodes and I gotta, like, it's just happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something that I want to happen, but it's not like I'm doing anything. Like this is just the natural flow of what needs to occur.
Yeah. One of the really cool things in that Andy Frisella interview is that the interview wraps, Hunter Weiss captures you shaking his hand. He comments how good the interview was. And you pull out a piece of paper and you were like, fucking 10 hours of research went into this. And one of my favorite pieces of content that you've created is the 5-minute montage of all your guests just being blown away by your research.
Gosh, that's so good.
Yeah, it's such a good piece of content. And I have to imagine that's such an amazing feeling when you find this nugget that you know the guest doesn't think that you know about them, but you've gone that deep in the trenches. What is your research process actually like? Because I've heard you say that you would guess that you probably do 60-ish hours of work on the podcast every single week for those 3 episodes. What does that research process look like for you?
So for me, the research is obviously how these moments are occurring, and they're such a key part of the journey. And it's like, I am just trying to imagine. The first thing is I listen to podcasts. I listen to at least 2 podcasts that the guest has been on themselves, because people say a lot of things that they don't remember saying when they're speaking. And so if you want to get those little insights, those little nuggets of information, I always listen to other podcasts. That's like an amazing way to do that. Another is just like going through their Twitter. People don't remember what they tweet. People don't remember, like we have so many thoughts, and there are very few that we hold on to. Maybe the beliefs we hold on to, but the actual specific thoughts, people are like, how did you know? Did you read a private text conversation that I had? Like, it's like, no, you put that out. You said that. And so for me, I think Sean Evans says the same thing. It's just work, man. Like, it's just actually hours with that person, with their Google, like just going down deep on them. Like, this is just a process of actual hours. The reason why it seems so seamless or there's such deep research is because I spent a lot of time doing it.
Well, I've also heard you say that a gem of information for you too is to go to the guest's local newspaper. So it'll be like Harrison Gray, McLean, Virginia, because that local newspaper like will reveal.
Just dox me.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk a little
Just give them my full address.
You love it.
Social security number?
Yes.
Because the local newspapers where a lot of the gems are and the information is from when the guest is really getting started, right?
Yes. That is a great tip that I forgot that I said in a previous podcast, right? It's just like when people will cover a person to their level of knowledge with them. You guys are able to give me a much more in-depth interview as friends of mine than people you would if we were just meeting for the first time, because you would have less context on my life and what I care about. So you look for the people who have the most context on that person's journey. So it might be like, I remember for Sam Parr's interview, I contacted his wife and was like, yo, like, is there anything I could bring up to Sam that could make him laugh or make him smile? And so find those people in your own interview. When you're interviewing someone, find the people in their lives that they're like, like that would be an interesting person to get their perspective on.
Yeah, there's so much context that you can piece together now with the internet in terms of like researching people that it does take a lot of work to like pull all that together, but within 30 minutes, you can piece together a lot of very thoughtful questions to ask someone.
On that point, it's like, you don't know when your biggest opportunity is going to come, and you don't know how much time you're going to get for that preparation. I remember Lewis Howes talking about, he went to interview Kobe Bryant and they called him that night and he was out, and he was like, all right, we're going to do the interview the next morning. And he's like, all right, I guess I'm doing an interview with Kobe Bryant in the morning. Like, I don't really have a choice. And so I always think about that story and always think about, you just don't know. So like, if it could be an hour, like make it an hour. And I think that I always understand that I have no idea when the biggest moment is going to come. So I just have to stay prepared and have to be able to do the work in 30 minutes if that's what's needed.
Totally. And our minor version of that is driving through Nashville, having no idea if Michael Chandler is going to come on the podcast. And then he DMs us and says, hey, we're on for 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And Harry's driving the car and we're like, fuck, I guess Michael Chandler's coming on tomorrow. But obviously in an excited way, but we default to like, look, at the end of the day, we know how to interview. We know how to have good conversations. We've done enough research on him. Now let's cram for the next couple hours and some genius is going to come out. Like I'd rather go in a little bit more underprepared with Michael Chandler and still get the interview than like never get to talk to the guy ever.
100%.
Sometimes being underprepared allows you to be in the conversation a little bit more.
True.
Like there is a little bit of that in the whole realm of podcasting. Like you might get a piece of a conversation that was not in any other podcast just because you didn't prep.
Because you're present,
Yeah.
right? That's a key piece of it. Where it's like I've said before that I actually don't get all the research because I'm not trying to do their life in order. I'm trying to be as present as I possibly can while also throwing in these insightful nuggets. But it's like presence is really the edge. Like, and the more present you can be, the better. Because there are things that I will say now that will trigger something that you've thought about before that you can only actually understand if you're in that moment.
Someone messaged you on Twitter to this point and said, hey, Danny, on a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous were you when you interviewed Andy? And you immediately responded and were like 1. And you talked about it on like a live Q&A podcast. And I'm like, I genuinely believe that that's true. And I also believe that if you had Elon Musk on or Donald Trump or some super, super A-lister, it would be that same number. And I'm curious, it's kind of a two-part question. 1, why do you think that is? Number 2, if there's anyone on here that's maybe starting to interact with more A-listers or get big guests on or have a huge interview, how can you maybe calm yourself and get to that level of 1 that you currently find that flow with your podcast guests?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's because I don't view people above me or below me. I just view human beings as human beings, which are amazing, but I don't have any sense of like, this person is someone I can't talk to. It's like, no, we're just all humans, dude. Like we're all here. We're all one. And so that understanding of every person playing in some role to a greater piece of the pie helps me understand they're just souls and we're just human beings and it's all good. And so what I would advise people who felt like, and were getting nervous, I would say, do some breath work right before. I do some breath work with guests sometimes before the podcast. And it's when I notice or feel any tension or unease or just feel like frenetic energy. And every time the guest will be like, oh my God, I needed that. I didn't realize I needed that.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting having someone who hasn't been interviewed a whole lot on the podcast because a lot of times they do show up with a little bit of nervousness. Like, what are they going to ask me? And there are some artful ways to get around that,
Yes.
but a lot of it does come out in the pre-podcast conversation, but sometimes they do bring that nervousness into the combo and you really have to disarm them in a lot of ways, like with the way you ask questions. And just, I think there's also a tone to like things as well. It's like you can just put someone at ease just by kind of like calming your breathing, slowing down, giving them a little bit of a breather, teeing them up with T-ball questions, like those sorts of things all help just relieve the nerves.
100%. I think that it's really a matter of letting the other person know that you care about them, you're on their side, and you're not trying to hurt them in any way. Sometimes people feel
Trick them.
Yeah. Some people feel defensive naturally if like, oh, like I'm scared that this person is going to ask this thing that is going to reveal this about me. And it's like, it's very important to, one, for the guest perspective, to feel at ease and peaceful yourself and know that you are who you are in this moment and just to present that as best as you can. But for the interviewer, it's also like, how can you just hold that person with love and kindness and just be like, you are amazing the way you are. And I want to present that in the best possible way for my audience.
I think one of the coolest feelings of having a show is being able to identify diamond in the rough guests, like you mentioned, that have maybe never been on a podcast before. Maybe it's one episode, maybe it's none. And you know they have so much value to offer. And you're like, I can't wait for my audience to be able to experience this. And I can be the person that actually like brings that greatness out of them and delivers that knowledge. And knowing like maybe they will be a little bit nervous that first 5 to 10 minutes, but what can I do to get them in that flow state and just have the best conversation possible?
Yeah. One of my friends, Julian Dory, he had this guy, James Fox, on his show. And then I think 2 months later, he goes on Rogan and he's just like, that wouldn't have happened without Julian's first appearance and first bringing James Fox to the forefront. And it's like, I find that skill to be so impactful. And it's something we talk about all the time of like, yo, if you can identify talent, you are ahead in whatever you're doing. Because let's say you're a musician and you want to collab with other musicians and you could find someone on the come up. It's like, that person's going to be a lot easier to reach in year 1 of their journey or year 3 than it is in year 10 or 20. So identifying that talent is such a skill. How have you guys been able to do that in this show? Because when you're looking at guests and doing 3 a week, it's like you have to find people on the come up.
I think a lot of the success that we've had with finding diamonds in the rough is really around people who think outside the existing paradigms. Like most of the people that we've had on the show that I think people come away with amazing feedback. It's like we kind of knew that a person was going to bring a unique perspective, like almost like those aha moments that you're talking about, or you ask the right question to a guest. It's almost like the guest is like presenting information to the audience that they've just never experienced. And so I think that looking in the right corners of like categories has helped us, like almost just taking a top down view. Like, okay, we want people who are going to be talking about like how money is affecting how like our food is cheap and crappy. Okay. Like who can we bring on for that type of conversation? That way of thinking, that way of framing, I think has helped us.
Yeah. I think I remember something that you said when we grabbed coffee at that place near Squatch like 2 months ago.
Filch
or Filch. You were like, I feel like you guys are really plugged in like I am. And what I mean by that for the listeners, like similar to you, dude, we've consumed this shit for years, dude. The amount of podcasts that I listen to, books, everything. So it's so easy where I'm like, okay, the founder of this bone broth company, she has 3,000 followers, but we've been drinking their bone broth for a year. It's the best tasting bone broth. No one really knows about her, but she's super based. She has a ton of knowledge. Let's just ping her, get her on the podcast. Like we both go back and forth like that all the time. Like the other day, Harry was like, hey, there's this badass rancher. He's blowing up. I was like, huh. My first thought was like, his followers a little bit small, but Harry's got a really good judge on guests. And then it's like, he brings a whole new perspective to the show. So it's like, I don't know, with Twitter and social media, it's like, you just find people that you think are interesting that you want to talk to. And the listener tends to find it really interesting as well.
I think someone who's all in, like someone who's put their balls on the line, like that's like
balls on the table.
Yeah. It's like, if they've done that, they're going to speak a story that's super real.
Yeah, that is something that I look for and see more and more, is that I'm attracted to people who are willing to bet on themselves and who are willing to be like, it's my way. I'm going to make this shit happen. I'm going to make it work.
Yeah.
What you were saying before about how you look for products you consume is something so interesting that my dad always preached to me in terms of investing in the stock market. It's like, only buy things that you actually use. And it's like, if you trust your own gauge of what the products that you care about, then you're also going to invest the right way. And if you think about the podcast as an investment in people, it's like, I'm investing in you guys by having you on my show.
Right.
You're investing in me by having me on your show. And so the investment in terms of a podcast is like, how do you take the products you use or the services you use and be like, how do I bring those people on the show?
Yeah.
And so
it's like a genuine interest in the person.
Yes.
Yeah. I think like a lot of the guests or basically every guest that we've had on, it's been me and Brett going, this person's super interesting. Like there's something about them that we would just want to dive deeper on.
Yeah. Whenever that happens, it's just like, I think there's a huge importance to paying attention to the feeling you get, because the feeling you get there is like, the better you get at describing it and the better you get at embodying it, the more you can see it and you can feel the flicker of it. It sounds like esoteric almost, but I've actually tuned into it more and more as I've been meditating, as I've been paying attention to who am I inviting on the podcast and why, and really asking and sitting with that, because that can help me identify other people as well and really help me gain and improve the skill of identifying talent. Because if you say that's another one of the core competencies, it's like, all right, people asking questions and now identifying people to bring on are the skills that I'm actually giving to the world. So like, let me get better at that.
100%. I want to pivot the conversation just really quick. I want to talk about like a second red light moment in your life that I just learned about. I think it was early 2021. I think you went on a stretch where you recorded 0 podcasts and I didn't understand why, but after listening to your interview in the Alchemist Library, it sounds like you were getting paid to do an NFT podcast. And I would have to imagine in the beginning that was probably incredible because, you know, podcasts are tough to monetize. Someone's going to pay you to talk about NFTs, which you were very passionate about. It seems like that turned out to not be the opportunity that it was meant to be, but it ended up leading you to be on your path where you are now. Can we unpack that story a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was I was doing the podcast for myself 3 episodes a week, and the NFT company comes to me and they're like, all right, we want you to keep doing what you're doing. We support you. We think what you're doing is amazing, but we also want you to help build this thing as well. This thing being our own podcast. They're only gonna have to do once a week. And so it'll be a great match. That was what it was in the start. And then eventually became something where it's like, they want me to do 4 or 5 episodes a week. And also I want to do 3 episodes a week for my own show. And I'm like, oh man. And also the content that I was doing was not the thing that I thought I was going to be doing in the start. And so all of it goes to say, like, I was like, I really like these people. They're great. And I don't want to let them down. I told them I would do this, and now it turned into something that I don't want to do. And so it made me feel really upset inside. It made me feel like, I don't want to, I just felt down. And it trickled over to the podcast. I stopped producing as many episodes. Eventually, for a month, I didn't do any. And like, you could even see it in the episodes. Look at my episode with Ariel Helwani and compare my face to how I look today. Just like 2 completely different human beings. And just like, how did I get out of that? I don't know. I think it was just like shortening the time horizons between the bad thing happening and being able to pivot, and because like that bad thing happening would have been, 6 months, a year of me being upset at myself for like, how could I go down this path? This clearly wasn't the right thing. This isn't betting on myself. And so I was like, all right, I just have to put one foot in front of the other. And then I started doing the podcast, and then I was like, my own podcast. And I was like, I love this. Like, this is what I was supposed to be doing. So going back to the activity was a really important thing for me, of like, I know I don't want to go back to the gym being the podcast, but I know if I do it, it'll really make me feel good, and it'll help me a lot.
It seems like that was a good test for you to affirm what you were actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And I think that's true. It's just like, you're meant to do something even when you get punched in the face, it's what you come back to. It's like, for me, that was a huge moment of like, oh wow, if I'm willing to do this even after not doing it for a month, then like I really should be doing it.
Yeah. There's an amazing book that not a lot of people know about. It's called Straight Line Leadership. And the whole premise of the book is, if you're at point A and you want to get to point B, how do we make that a straight line and get to it as effortlessly as possible? And one of the most impactful parts for me in the book was it talks about the concept of mental reframing, particularly around problems, and not even telling yourself that you have a problem. You just have a situation that you need to solve. So I'm curious, like, what did you do to kind of did you just quit the NFT job and just focus on the podcast? Like, how did you get yourself out of that?
Yeah. So that was pretty much the long and short of it. Because I had built up the knowledge of NFTs, and also I had made like $60,000 or $70,000 unexpectedly from NFTs, meaning I bought Gary Vee's NFT in, I want to say, June of 2021. And I'm watching this thing go up and rise in price. And I'm like, oh my God, like, this is insane. And that's part of what was fueling my enjoyment and passion of it. But so I could quit the job and sell the NFT and make the money, and like could cover my expenses for a year. And so that was a huge piece of it. And that's like what I practically did in that moment to really help myself.
So were there things that you were chasing in that moment? Like, do you wish you could change how you approach that, or do you think that was a lesson that you needed to learn?
Everything in perfect timing, even the things that don't make any sense in that moment. And it's also worth noting that I stopped meditating in this time. Like, if I think about the summer of 2021 to like around that time, just stop meditation completely. And it's like, makes sense why I personally would go off track when I stop listening to myself. I've noticed that time and time again. When I listen to myself, it really births and creates new things in my life. When I stop, I go slightly on the wrong track.
So you know the meditation, that's your recentering point for you.
Yeah.
Dude, it's a tough feeling when you're getting paid to do something creative that you don't feel passionate about. It's literally trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, because it's like you getting paid creates this like arbitrary attachment to this thing, and then it kills the creativity.
Yeah.
100%.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And you think it's like, it's this dream setup. And then you're like, holy shit, I have to do 4 to 5 episodes on this thing every single week. It's like, that's the last thing I could possibly do. And I'm sure that it probably was reflective in the product to you. I'm sure it was still a great podcast, but it's not what you were meant to be doing.
And it also reaffirmed that the thing that I'm actually passionate about is not just talking, right? It's talking with a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it has to go deeper than just talking, because I was just talking and I was getting paid just to talk, and it wasn't enjoyable. Why is that? Because it can't be about just anything. It has to be about real things that impact me at a deep level and that I'm pulled to bring out of people. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Where do you see all this going? Like, you've put so much effort into getting yourself to this point. You've grown so much through the show and put so much energy into it. You have to, I imagine there's a vision that you maybe see some of it, not all of it, but where are you aiming this ship right now to sail to?
I want to sell out Madison Square Garden, and I want to sell out Madison Square Garden hopefully in the next 10 years too, because I want to do it before my grandparents pass away. And it's really important for me to show them and show people around me in my life like what is possible when you put your mind to a specific task. And when you go inward, when you find out what you actually care about, and it manifests into something that you're good at, something that you get better at, it's like, how far can you take that? And so, yeah, I see this going to selling out Madison Square Garden for a live podcast, and hopefully tour around the United States and the world, because why not? Why not take it and imagine to the biggest, craziest place you can that will fill you with as much joy as you can possibly imagine? It's like, we're on a floating rock in space. Let's make it a fun experience.
With the people that you care about the most, your grandparents. I know that, so I was in the car this morning with our mutual friend, Matt Wagner, going to Squatch, and I was telling him that we were having you on the show today, and he was all fired up. And he said that he really connected with you and knew that you guys were going to be close because he got the sense that you were super close with your grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
and it reminded him of his own relationship with his parents and his grandparents. So can you talk a little bit about the impact that your grandparents or your grandfather has had on you?
Absolutely. I mean, Matt brings that up to me almost every time I see him. And it makes sense that that is the reason why. My grandparents, on my mom's side, I'm very close with both my grandma and my grandpa. And they are, to me, what it looks like to live a good life, to live a life that is true, to live a life that is real, to live a life that is of service, to live a life that is also benefiting yourself. It's selfish and selfless at the same time. My grandpa does whatever the fuck he wants and has for a long time, but he also donates to charity. He also gives back to his family. He also cares about the way he shows up in the world, and he does things that he doesn't want to do. So like, he has been able to straddle this beautiful line between selfish and selfless. And my grandma is so of service, so giving, wants to help everyone, every situation. It's so much bigger than herself. And she has instilled this love for myself through her love that can never go away. And so if you want to know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing and how I'm capable of doing them, it's just because of my grandparents, because of my parents, for giving me love, for giving me hard work, for being able, I'm just doing what they've given me. And that is flowing through. And so any bit of success I have is due to them. And that's why I want to show them what they've actually done has given to the world. So 19,763 people, Madison Square Garden, hopefully sometime in the next 10 years.
What's the first memory that comes to mind when you think about your grandparents?
They drove me to over the bridge, and we're going to pick up my brother at the hospital. And I just remember, like, it's just like a little moment like that, a grandparent giving you that just connection and family and love. My grandpa running marathons, my grandma cooking me meals. Like, it's just like little things that show up and manifest as love that is so hard to put into words, but that will never go away.
It's an amazing feeling as a man to realize as you get older that your parents and your grandparents are really the thing that's filled your cup up. realizing that you've hit the jackpot, you've hit the lottery with such an amazing family. And then it seems like you feel that obligation to make them proud and just go do good in the world the way that they've done great things in the world and have made you the man that you are today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely so true. And it's something that I don't take for granted for a single day. And yeah, I hit the lottery. I don't know what I did in a previous life to deserve this mind, body, and be given so much love. Like I feel really blessed. And so I just want to give it to other people to the best of my abilities.
Dude, I love your passion for everything. I had one goofy question to ask you at the end. Who would you interview throughout history? Like someone who's no longer with us, who would you go back and interview if you could?
Benjamin Franklin was the first person to build a media empire and also focus on improving himself. He would have 13 attributes every day that he would check off to make sure that he completed. And he was one of the first people to have a newspaper. And so, I mean, if you think about what we're doing, podcasting, and also becoming all we can be, if you look at the father of that is Benjamin Franklin. So maybe one day through AI we'll be able to interview.
We'll make that
Be a great
happen,
combo.
man. But
Maybe
dude,
in Madison Square Garden.
19,000 people. Man, I feel like every time we talk to you, it's like you get like a shot of espresso, a jolt of adrenaline, lightning bolt. It's like you just have this really special energy, man. It's like Harry felt that the first time that you guys met. I feel that now that we're close. And just to be able to sit on this side of the mic and get to learn more about you and have you share your story, it's really special. And we just appreciate you, man. We love you. And we'll see you in December at the St. Jude's Marathon, which we're going to be doing together too.
I cannot wait. I signed up for it last night, actually.
Nice.
As coincidence will have it. Dude, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you guys. I'm so grateful for you as friends, as fellow podcast hosts on this journey, and just as human beings. Like, this was a really special interview, and I'm grateful that this is on the books, because this is a conversation we would have, you know, albeit more facing towards me than it would be when the cameras were off. But thank you guys so much for this opportunity, and I'll never forget it.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks, Danny.